Greetings and salutations! Welcome to a video about audio. Today we're going to take a look at my realistic Shure R25XT phono cartridge, a blast from the past from the 1980s. So before we get into talking about the particulars of the cartridge, I want to give you guys just a little bit of history up front here. I'll try not to ramble on too much because I think that it would help especially new viewers to the channel if they understood the context that this cartridge fits in my life. And why it means something to me anyway, and why I bought it. Because anybody with sense wouldn't buy this thing, but I just did. So this is a picture of me back about 1987 or 88. And this is from the program guide for WFOS in Chesapeake, Virginia, which was a radio station that was owned by the Chesapeake Public Schools. And when I was in high school, I got the opportunity to go there in the afternoons and take their broadcast class. It was part of their vocational technical school course there. I actually went to school in Portsmouth, Virginia, and I used to have to ride a bus into Chesapeake, which is another town over. It made for quite the day. And so I would go to regular high school in the morning, and then I would take these classes in the afternoon. And when I signed up for the classes, I expressed an interest at that time in becoming an engineer. I wanted to learn how to be a true broadcast engineer and learn all about transmitters and amplifiers and how it's all wired up. And I'm still very interested in that, and I have been, throughout my life. But I got about halfway through the course, and I realized that I didn't want to be an engineer as much as I wanted to be on the air, because they put us on the air anyway. You had to learn all the jobs in the radio station. And I kind of liked the idea of being on the air and working in programming more than I liked the idea of being an engineer, because there's a lot of responsibility that comes with engineering, and I just didn't feel comfortable with it. So, and to be quite honest, to tell you the truth, in those days when I was taking those classes, I learned enough to pass the test. Not that I wasn't curious about it, it was just I was a kid, and there was a lot of other stuff going on in my life, and so therefore I didn't have the focus. The funny thing is that now I probably know more than I did then, because I guess about 10 or 15 years ago, I decided that I wanted to relearn the first principles, and I went and actually got my textbooks from that time, and I have read those and watched a ton of YouTube videos and done a lot of research, so now I have a way better understanding of how all that stuff worked than I did back then. This is the truth. The turntables that I'm in front of here are Technics SP15s, which were countertop-mounted turntables with Audio-Technica tone arms, and the cartridges are Stanton 680s. Now, I looked up to the Stanton cartridges in a big way back then because they were all over radio stations, they were everywhere, and they were expensive. That you couldn't really buy them at home, and at this point in time, I wasn't real hip on the fact that Pickering cartridges were actually Stantons, just with a different name on them. Pickering was the consumer side of Stanton. Although around this period of time, I did get my first Pickering cartridge, and it opened up a whole new world for me. So what kind of cartridges did I have on my turntables at home? Well, it was what we could get at Radio Shack, boys and girls. Radio Shack was the place to go, and this is the cartridge we're talking about in this video when it first appeared in the Radio Shack catalog, and this says new for 84, which meant that this would have been published in late 83. The catalogs usually came out in the later part of the year, so you'd have one for Christmas, so you could figure out what toys you wanted and beg for them. They knew exactly what they were doing, and if you were in my room when I was a teenager, I can guarantee there was a Radio Shack catalog in there somewhere, because I always had the Radio Shack catalog. My love of records and audio equipment, I just kind of was born with it, and my dad had a fascination for electronics as well. He was constantly bringing things home when I was a kid. My dad was a bit of a scrounge. If he saw something on the side of the road or at a yard sale or somebody wanted to trade something, he would do it. And so he would bring home all of these record players and TVs and radios and stuff, and we'd try and get them going. And where did we go? Radio Shack, of course. We went through a period probably around 1985 or so where, yeah, that was about right, where we were bringing home console stereos. Those great big huge console stereos. And trying to get them to work. And my mom actually finally said, "That's enough. Stop it. No, we got to quit that." And they all had to go. And so Dad switched over at that point to picking up even higher end audio equipment. And he also started bringing home big console TVs like those Curtis Mathis, great big 21-inch televisions. Yeah, we had a couple of those as well. Used to drive my mother crazy. Anyway, when we needed to get parts for these things, we went to Rad Shack. Rad Shack was also the place to go to get anything that had to do with needles for a turntable. You got to remember, back in these days, there were still a lot of ceramic cartridges around. Any of those all-in-one systems that were so popular, they would have a ceramic RCA cartridge on it, usually with I'm trying to remember the name of the company now. There's lovely changers that were on everything. BSR turntables were everywhere, and they had these not terrible ceramic cartridges for what they were and what they were on. They were fine. They usually would track between 4 and 5 grams, and as long as you kept the styli replaced, they did not damage your records. That's not such a horrible tracking force. But the upgrade to that would have been something like this. If you got a hold of a turntable that you could plug into a proper amplifier with a real magnetic phono stage on it, then you'd probably go down and buy one of these. Or you'd be like me, and I would pick up something like this because I was a kid, and this is what I could afford, right? This is the ad for the realistic Shure moving magnet cartridges that Radio Shack was selling in the U.S. By the way, in other parts of the world, this was known as the Tandy store. Tandy. It was the Tandy Corporation. Anyhow, they had an agreement with Shure. Shure was making cartridges for them and putting their own model numbers on them. Realistic would, and they sold them under the Realistic/Shure brand name here. And their top of the line in the mid-'80s was the RXT5. They did come out with an RXT6, but that was later on. The RXT5 was sort of kind of like a poor man's version of the Shure V15. It had a stabilizer brush on it, and I had one of these. This was my first experience with the Shure magnetic cartridges. I picked one up in the summer of 1986, and you know, to be quite honest, when I was looking at the catalog, I couldn't believe the price. Now, $50 doesn't sound like a lot now, but when I was a kid, and this was 86, what was I, 15, 16 years old? That was a lot of money to me, so somehow or another I scraped up $50 to go buy a cartridge. And I brought it home and put it on my Akai turntable, which had come with it was a cartridge that was an Akai PC35, which was really just a rebadged Audio-Technica conical 3472p. That's what it was. Not a horrible cartridge, a little bit bright, a little bit harsh. High distortion, though, on those cartridges. They pick up a lot of inner groove distortion and whatnot. So now I bring this cartridge home, and it has a hyper-elliptical stylus, a 0.2 by 0.7. It's got the stabilizer brush. It is a completely different world. I put it on that turntable, and I was blown away. I love the sound. So after that, every time that I needed a cartridge, I would go to Radio Shack and buy one. And I had several through the years of this line. They had later on come out with a bunch that didn't have the brush, and they were much cheaper, and they were still those universal cartridges where you could plug it into a tone arm if it was a P-mount. That's the T4P system that Technics came up with in 1980. They were very popular in the 1980s. Everybody kind of thought this is the direction turntables were going to go, and you didn't have to fool around with mounting and aligning a cartridge, which was kind of cool. And the universal cartridges had an adapter that you plug the P-mount cartridge in, and then you could put it on a 1/2 inch. Now, the only downside to that is, first of all, it's kind of a Frankenstein construction once you get it done. And the other thing about it is it makes for a rather tall cartridge assembly. And on some tone arms, that would be an issue, especially if you couldn't adjust the SRA on the tone arm. But it wasn't too bad with the Shure cartridges. You'd get about an 18 millimeter tall assembly there, which is about the height of a modern Ortophone cartridge, OM series or the 2M series. They're all 18 millimeters. So it worked out fine at that time. Now, the Shure cartridges that had the standard 1/2 inch mounts, they were very short. If you remember the good old M97XE, which was one of the last hi-fi cartridges that Shure made before they closed their doors, that thing is only 15 millimeters tall, whereas an Audio-Technica cartridge is about 17, and the Ortophone cartridges are about 18. So my way of dealing with that is just to change the mat. I'm not real big on having tone arms with adjustable SRA. The reason why is that is so hard to get exactly right when you can adjust the tone arm. It's better to know what the tone arm is looking for and change the mats, or at least it is for me, and that's what I do. And those of you who know what I was just talking about, you have fun in the comments telling me how I'm crazy. Go right ahead. It's all right. I don't mind. So anyway, this is where my experience with these cartridges comes from. And the audiophile people have not really figured out that these are Shure cartridges and they're awesome. So they pop up on eBay every now and again for not so much money. As a matter of fact, I saw an RXT5 on eBay yesterday. Somebody's selling it. They say it's new old stock in the box for $100. I was tempted to buy it, but I didn't. I was a good boy. Nope. I've already got too many cartridges. I picked up this cartridge for $70. Now remember, this sold originally for $19.95 in the mid-80s. But I saw it and it intrigued me, so it was my birthday present to myself. And this is the package that arrived. And as you can see, it's a little bit worse for wear. I have no idea where this has been for the last almost 40 years. Because this could be a 1983 model that came out, you know, right when that catalog was published. And so, therefore, that's 39 years. So where has this thing been all these years? It was sealed. As you can see, I took a lot of pictures because the only way to get to it would be to destroy the package. And so I took lots of pictures because I wanted to kind of preserve that. On the back, it doesn't have much. It's just a chart that shows how to connect it. That's all it is. And if we zoom in here, you'll see down here on the package we get some specifications. Frequency response 20 hertz to 20,000 cycles per second, or kilohertz. The channel separation is 20 dB. Tracking force right around 3 grams, 2.5 to 3.5 grams. Stylus shape 0.4 by 0.7. That is a biradial. We now call that mostly an elliptical these days. Biradial is an old way of saying that. Basically 2 radii on the stylus. So that's what you got for your $20. I think that these were mainly intended for changers. Turntables that were a little rough in their actions with tone arms. This also would have been an okay replacement for a jukebox at that time. A lot of jukeboxes, they had Pickering cartridges in them, and so those Pickerings usually track pretty heavy there. They tracked 6-7 grams, so you would have had to have been able to adjust that, but you could have put it in a jukebox, let's put it that way. And of course it had this very wide range there, so it would have worked on a lot of different turntables at that time. So I did take it out of the package and I put it on my dual turntable, and I am setting it up here. I'm using a protractor to make sure that the cartridge is aligned properly. I have a bare-walled protractor from Hudson Hi-Fi. That's the one that I use all the time. And for my dual turntable, it's an absolute must because it's a non-standard head shell. Well, it's a standard head shell, but it's an angled head shell, and there's really no way to measure that like from the you can do with an S-shaped tone arm where you measure 50 or 52 millimeters from the washer on the plug to the stylus tip, and then that will tell you exactly how that's aligned. I do that a lot with my Fluence turntable that has an S-shaped tone arm. It's looking for 52 millimeters to be properly aligned, and that alignment, by the way, is bare-walled. I love that turntable for that reason. So I've got a couple of ways to align that thing. Alignment is important, folks. If you don't get this right, you can get all kinds of sibilance and distortion and crazy stuff going on in your sound that you'll be scratching your head trying to figure out where it came from. So get you a protractor, learn how to do this. It's important. So after getting it set up, I took the turntable in and I plugged it in, and here is this cartridge playing a record for the very first time in its long lifespan. 39 years on a shelf somewhere, and it finally gets to sing. And the audio quality was interesting. Let's put it that way. It was not exactly what I expected. Now, I was looking for the Shure sound, which is slightly warm, kind of a compressed mid-range, but still very pleasant to listen to. And Shure cartridges always had a lot of high-frequency extension, but the high frequencies were not accented. And that's kind of what I got with this cartridge, with the exception that I would say for this particular model, there was actually a bit of a roll-off of the high frequencies. There wasn't really much above 8 or 10 kilohertz here. And that could be because the stylus has been sitting for so many years and it needs to break in, or it could be just the way this cartridge sounds. Remember, this is the low end of the totem pole for that time. But it is altogether a very pleasant sound. I could see myself being very happy with the sound of this cartridge. I had no major issue with it. It was funky. It sounded good. It tracked very clean. There is no sibilance. There's no edginess to this. It's very nice to listen to, albeit, like I said, you're not getting those blistering highs that you get from like a modern Audio-Technica cartridge or even an Ortophone 2 in blue or Fawn. Phone or Fawn? It's Ortophone. I've been corrected. That's what I need to say. Try and stick to that. Anyway, those cartridges have a lot of high end. There's a lot of sheen there. The Shure cartridge that I have been listening to this week on this turntable does not. Now, there's an upside to that, especially if you are playing kind of old, scratchy records, or maybe like funky 45s you've picked up somewhere and they have a little wear on them. You don't hear as much of it. It acts as a filter. Whereas if you take a high-compliant cartridge with a lot of high-frequency detail and you play a worn record on it, guess what? You hear all that wear. You hear all of the distortion. So this would actually be a pretty decent cartridge if you were playing old junky records. And so on that note, it's pretty good. I mean, if you're not looking for a lot of high end, you don't expect it, great. It sounds pretty decent. It's definitely a very listenable sound. And if I bought it for $20 back in the day, I think I would have been happy with it. I don't think that I would have poked holes in it because it definitely is a step up from ceramic, and maybe with time as it breaks in, it will get better with those characteristics. Got to remember, we're talking about a very old cartridge, and the suspension, well, it might not be in the greatest condition. The rubber might be very hard. So here it is playing that same record, business as usual, by Men at Work. I figured it was appropriate. It was an album that came out in 1982. this would have definitely been something that I would have been playing back in those days, and I was kind of impressed with it. Now, I have been playing records on and off this week with the cartridge, and the downfall of this cartridge, the one thing that is really not there is the stereo separation. It just doesn't have a whole lot. And modern cartridges do a much better job with stereo separation. And the higher end Shure cartridges, like the RXT5, would have been way better than this cartridge. The RXT5 could easily do 27 to 30 dB of separation at 1 kilohertz, and probably really good up high as well. Whereas this cartridge, it says 20. I think you're barely getting 20. The AT3691 is currently rated at 18 dB of separation, which I think is dumbed down quite a bit, that number anyway. But it's miles better stereo-wise than this cartridge is. This cartridge, really, like with headphones on it, you can notice it. I was listening to the Beatles this morning before I started doing this video, and one of the tracks that I was listening to was I Am the Walrus, the original mix of that, and there's some super wide, out-of-phase, crazy effects at the end of that song, and I couldn't really hear it. It sounded like it was collapsed. So, yeah, not a whole lot of stereo separation. But if you don't care about that, I mean, if you're one of these people that's just sticking the speakers real close together in the rack on your stereo anyway, and you're not paying attention to it, you wouldn't know. But if you're doing headphones, yeah, the bigger cartridges kick its butt. Absolutely. But still, a lot of fun, and a very cool cartridge, and a nice blast from the past, and another one that I can add to the pile. I have been doing this now, buying these cartridges since I got back into records. That would have been 2010. I have given away mountains of cartridges to people through the years because I get them and I play with them and then I put them away. So I don't know, but this is one I probably want to hang on to because it's rare. And I was also really surprised to see that there are a lot of really nice upgrade styli available for this cartridge now. Jaico in Japan makes a couple of them. There are some really high-end upgrade styli for it on the LP Gear site. Turntable Needles has an upgrade as well. And plus Fan Steel makes a direct replacement for the... This is the X3 stylus. That's the Shure stylus that this is. And they make a direct replacement that you can get for like $30-something, something like that. So there's a lot of great styli out there, and maybe somewhere down the road I might try one on this cartridge. For right now, though, I'm just, like I said, playing with it, enjoying the sound. It gives me a grin, and it takes me back to a completely different day and time. But I tell you, darn it, I am really tempted to buy an RXT5. That thing, there's one on eBay right now. Somebody's selling for $100. I saw it, and I went, no, I ain't going to do it. I'm not going to buy it because I've got too much junk now. And I'm having too much fun with my Gold Ring E3 on my Fluence turntable. That's been a real joy. I just did a video about that. And the Dual sounds great with the Ortophon 2 in blue. And I kind of like that, so I've put that back on this turntable. And I think that's how I'm going to rock it for a little while here. Thank you for watching. I do appreciate it. I've had a lot of great response and a few subscriptions for these videos about audio. I guess you Linux people are wondering where the videos are. Don't worry, when something happens with Linux, I'll post it. So your comments and suggestions are always appreciated. Thank you for watching. We'll do it again soon.